Ladies and gentlemen, hello, and let me welcome you this afternoon at our debate here in Prague on behalf of the Institute of Politics and Society and European Liberal Forum. My name is Ondřej Malý and I'll be the moderator of today's debate. I may start with this is the 5G debate, obviously, so there's hardly a day that 5G is not mentioned today in the media as the next big thing that's on the horizon. You know, but if you look at your phones today, there's still a 4G letters on display. Usually we are very happy for having 4G, but the next generation of mobile networks is hailed as the new technology to enable all the future nice things, right? Such as autonomous cars, massive Internet of Things, Industry 4.0, or if you are very adventurous, even remote surgery. There are, however, only a few real business models in place right now, and the telcos have been understandably quite reluctant to invest and so far to move 5G beyond the hype that it is now and invest in the new technology. For example, if we compare it to 4G, I remember when we did an auction in 2013 in the Czech Republic, there was a real race to cover Czechia with 4G fast internet as soon as possible. Even one of the local telcos, they even used their own old frequencies, old spectrum that they had to cover 4G, to cover Czechia with 4G signal, to get ahead of the pack, to introduce the fast internet sooner than the competition. Obviously, with 5G, we see a much more cautious approach. If you are not a hardware vendor, obviously, Nokia, Huawei, or Ericsson, they really push the telcos to invest, and they're much more aggressive than the operators. But well, the telcos, they still have been quite reluctant to commit specifically to invest. We have some rollouts of 5G in the EU, notably in Switzerland and in the UK, or in Europe, I should say in Europe, obviously. But mainly it's to increase the telco presence in the fixed access market, actually. In the UK particularly, for example, 5G is mainly fixed access technology. But in the US, there is obviously already 5G networks deployment ongoing by all the mobile operators, and being the largest, AT&T is at the forefront of this deployment. They have this 5G-like experience, I remember, and they had been under fire for misleading advertising for that. But the customers have been very happy to have speeds in hundreds of megabits per second. And we have Chris Boyer from AT&T here to talk about the AT&T positions and to talk about what AT&T thinks about 5G and about all the opportunities and risks it presents. And I'm also happy that Filip Plevač accepted our invitation, and we will talk about what the industry really needs. Filip is a former CEO of Moravia Chems, which still is a state-of-the-art packaging plant, and now he is an advisor for managers and industry leaders on how to cope with digitalization in their companies. I think it's what we really need is the reality check to the hype that is now 5G. That's, in my opinion, sorely needed, and I hope that Filip will provide it during our discussion. As I said, there is not much of commercial deployment of 5G networks yet, but there's a lot of talk about cybersecurity regarding the 5G networks, and obviously the involvement of Chinese companies. And the Czech National Office for Cybersecurity and Information Security has issued a warning last year against Huawei and ZTE companies. And I'm very happy that the Deputy Director Jaroslav Schmid is here with us, and he's here to talk about the experience that they had so far. Obviously there's some backlash from political actors as well. We hosted, in Prague, a huge cybersecurity conference last year. We adopted security proposals that may serve as guidelines for individual EU member states and also for internet providers, obviously, and mobile operators on how to approach security in their networks. And building on that, our northern neighbor may have the most elaborate position on the 5G politically and diplomatically. The Polish ruling party, Prawo i Sprawiedliwość, is probably going to win the election in October, and they have explicitly stated in their party manifesto that the 5G networks are fundamental to state information security, and there should be a Polish company to control the network, without specifying if it's going to be a state-owned network, perhaps, or a wholesale network, or what's the kind of network they suppose. But we are obviously honored to have Mr. Antoni Rega, Deputy Head of the Mission Embassy of the Republic of Poland in the Czech Republic, and to present a Polish approach to 5G networks and to the information security issues. So without further delay, I now pass the mic to Chris, and we shall start with 5 to 7 minutes interventions, as we stated in our introductory email, and then we'll get to the questions, and we'll kick off the discussion. So, Chris, if you can.
Hi everyone, thank you very much for having me here today. Again, my name is Chris Boyer, I'm with AT&T. Hopefully everyone is somewhat familiar with AT&T, but just to give you a very quick background, we are, I think, generally the largest telecommunications company in the world globally. We currently serve somewhere upwards of 120 million wireless subscribers in the United States. We also have somewhere around, don't quote me on the exact numbers, but 25 million broadband subscribers as well. And then we also have wireline voice and data services, and serve a lot of US multinationals around the world. We operate in somewhere around 180 countries globally, serving US multinationals operating overseas. We also have a presence in Mexico and Latin America with our Rio affiliates and DirecTV Latin America, so we have a very large presence around the world. And then the other thing that you may know the most of about AT&T is that we also have recently acquired in the last year Warner Media, of which HBO is one of our subsidiaries, so we offer content and television programming, and I believe HBO is available here in the Czech Republic, so we have a presence pretty much around the world. So today I want to talk a little bit about 5G and kind of where AT&T is on 5G, and I think really just want to provide my perspective and our perspective from our experience in the US to the extent that it's applicable here in the EU. I think from a market rollout perspective, 5G is a major priority for AT&T. We are currently doing trials, and again, don't quote me on the exact numbers, but something around 19 markets in the United States. We are looking towards a nationwide 5G build out by 2021. The 5G build will be generally done using different types of devices from a network perspective, but a key component of that is spectrum. So we use low, mid, and high band spectrum to build out the 5G network. It's a combination of really mid-band spectrum, which provides kind of the broad range or the geographic fit with what we call a millimeter wave spectrum, which provides the high bandwidth. And so at the end of the day, 5G will allow for us to deliver very high bandwidth and low latency based services. Just as an example, we have a test network up in Washington, D.C. where I live, in a facility that we run there. I actually run the facility, and we have a test millimeter wave small cell in the building, and you can actually, last week I was using a Samsung Galaxy 10s 5G. It was getting about 950 megabytes off that particular small cell unit there on that device. So you can really provide extremely high bandwidth, low latency based capabilities, and at the end of the day, our view is that 5G will not only enable faster speeds on your cell phone, but also it will power what we'd like to call the industrial Internet of Things. So it'll be used as the latency benefits of 5G are as significant as the bandwidth gains, because in the long run, we view it that it will enable a range of applications, as mentioned in the introduction, around things like autonomous vehicles or smart cities or a whole range of different deployments that are dependent upon the low latency applications. In the past, with networks, typically what would happen is you'd have your mobile device, you'd launch an application, the application would then communicate with the internet, and you'd get all your content from the internet. With 5G, because of the need for very high, quick response times to enable some of these applications, we're actually taking, if you look at the 5G standards, you're actually doing what's called mobile edge computing. You're moving the functionality from the internet closer to the user. You're enabling higher bandwidth speeds, and all those things in combination create this low latency application capability that we think will enable a lot of different new use cases around 5G. And we are not trying to predict what those are. I think there'll be, when we did 4G LTE in the United States, Uber has kind of become the killer app for that. We didn't realize that when we rolled it out, but that's kind of how it turned out. I think we'll see a lot of similar types of innovation with 5G, both in the US and around the world as these networks are deployed. So that's kind of where we are in 5G. I spend a lot of my time dealing with cybersecurity issues, so happy to talk about those issues as well. I can give you a quick perspective on the supply chain issues. I think the main issue that AT&T has been concerned about there is that certain companies around the world, in particular Huawei, are gaining market share in the telecommunications equipment markets in a very rapid fashion that could crowd out other options. And our main interest from a supply chain security standpoint is that we want to see a very robust, competitive, diverse supply chain continue to exist over time, so that we don't end up in effect where we're highly dependent upon a very small number of suppliers, and in particular ones that, depending upon where you sit, may have different types of security issues associated with it. So we'd like to see an environment where there's a diverse, competitive supply chain. We do think there are policies that can be enacted that will help drive in that direction. I'm not necessarily talking about bans of particular suppliers, but there are things like interoperability, vendor diversity, transparency type of requirements, similar to some of the things that were put in the product proposals earlier in the spring, that we think could move the industry in the right direction to deal with these issues. I know that Poland has recently taken action to deal with some of these issues, as have a few other European states. So I think I'd be more than happy to engage in a conversation about those issues as well. So with that, I'm turning over to the next speaker.
Okay, thank you very much, Chris. So our next speaker, we'll move to the cybersecurity area, and I will give the floor now to Mr. Wringa from the Polish Embassy to talk about the Polish position on 5G and cybersecurity.
Thank you. I would like to tell you that, contrary to distinguished guest here, I'm not an expert, but a diplomat. I'm Deputy Chief of Mission in the Polish Embassy in Prague, and I will try to tell you about Polish position in general terms concerning G5. Of course, the most important thing is that G5 matters and G5 networks and G5, 5G matters are the pillars of the economy. And for this reason, also in Poland, just like in the other countries in Europe, we stress importance of this newest technology. However, contrary to the situation in the United States, we are far behind, and there is maybe fewer distance between application of this technology in Poland comparing to the United States. However, according to governmental plans, we are about to start with 5G technology in one main city in Poland in next year, 2020. It might be in September, in August, so 1 year from today. As everybody knows, the 5G technology, this is the basically transmission from big number of devices, and in some approximation it can be 1 million devices per square kilometer or square mile. So this technology, contrary to, for instance, the voyage to Moon or Mars, cannot be the matter of delay, because because of the world economy, which is going in this direction. We cannot escape from 5G technology. This is the basics from future economy. However, there are, of course, opposition of some kind, which taking under consideration some health problems because of electromagnetic fields and so on, and of course we had in Europe maybe 2 years ago some appeal of a few hundred scientists and doctors against this technology, but I must tell you, however, I'm not an expert on just observer, that for common people, for instance, for the most people in Poland, the 5G technology is something like speaking about Yeti. Everybody is talking about this, but nobody knows what's going on and what it's about. So the more information we have, that's better for this project. And of course, there is one more thing very important, that 5G technology is basically not for individual person, but basically for industry as a whole, because this data transmission is maybe supposed to be maybe 50 times or 100 times bigger than in previous technologies. So there is another aspect of this matter. During the last year, we have in Poland problem with the one Chinese company. Everybody knows what's the name of this company, and there is a mark of some, how to say, break of security. We have from our partners from all over the transatlantic world, we have some information concerning this, and of course the growth, stability, economic improvement is very important, but on the same level the security matters, the independence of the country is the same, of the same importance. 5G will enable us, it will enable a vast array of new applications, including the provision of critical services to the public, which will benefit our citizens and our economies. Increased amounts of data on 5G networks will further interconnect the economies of all countries, including the United States and Poland, and facilitate cross-border services and commerce. Protecting these next-generation communication networks from disruption or manipulation, and ensuring the privacy and individual liberties of the citizens of the United States, Poland, and the other countries is of vital importance. Therefore, Poland and the United States endorse the Prague proposals and these Prague proposals, this is proposals from the May this year conference on the beginning of the May. The chair's statement from the Prague 5G Security Conference, and as an important step toward developing a common approach to 5G network security and ensuring a secure and vibrant 5G ecosystem. The Prague proposals emphasize the need for 5G networks to be constructed based on free and fair competition, transparency, and the rule of law. Poland and the United States note that as a part of a robust and comprehensive approach to network security, a careful and complete evaluation of 5G component and software providers is essential. We believe that all countries must ensure that only trusted and reliable suppliers participate in our networks to protect them from unauthorized access or interference. A rigorous evaluation of suppliers should include the following state elements: whether the supplier is subject without independent judicial review to control by a foreign government, whether the supplier has a transparent ownership structure, and whether the supplier has a record of ethical corporate behavior and is subject to a legal regime that enforces transparent corporate practices. That's it, as far as this declaration. And as far as questions concerning 5G, what will the installation of the 5G network allow the European states to do? What? The basic growth and stability in the economic terms. Another question, what security risks will be installation of the 5G network entail? Risk, I must tell you, risk of human liberties, risk of breaching freedom and so on. What security measures should the European Union take to secure its cyber space? Basically, the cooperation is the basic tool to secure to be more secure in the contemporary world. A few minutes ago, I have went to the TV screen somewhere on the corridor, and I have seen that not drones from Germany rebels was involved in the last attack in Saudi Arabia, but kind of type of cruise missiles which were originated in Iran. So the present world is full of fake news, and we have to take this under our consideration, speaking about 5G and application of 5G for economy. The security is the most important. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Rega. And now I'll give the floor to Jaroslav Schmid, who's the Deputy Director of the National Cyber Security and Information Security Authority. Have I said it correctly? I hope so. Hope I translated it correctly to English. So Jaroslav, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Maybe first of all, several words about our agency. We are responsible for the cybersecurity and protection of the classified information communication system. That means that we are responsible for the protection of the classified information, not only our national, but third parties like NATO and EU and so on. In this area, we certify information systems, and for protection of the information, we are using crypto equipments, and we develop national crypto algorithm and crypto equipments. Cyber security is quite new responsibility because our agency was established 2 years ago, and we are responsible for the protection of information in critical information infrastructure, in the important governmental network, and information system essential services providers. We have special law for protection of the information systems, classified information system, and for cybersecurity too. If we talk about security of the 5G networks, we have to have total new approach, because it is not only new generation of the communication systems. In these systems, we have to start build security on the start of the building of them, because I think that this year will 11 European countries have auction of frequencies for this network, and next year I think about 6 or 8 countries. And if we can implement some security measures to the existing system, it is very, very complicated, and often it is expensive. And like mentioned, our Polish colleague, we organized beginning of May this year, with cooperation of our MFA, international conference. That participating in this conference was 32 countries, and the result of the conference is Prague proposals. And like mentioned our Polish colleague, the Prague proposals are mentioned in the declaration between Polish and US. And our cooperation in this area is not only between US and other countries, but for example, 2 weeks ago was in the Krynice, the Poland Economic Forum, where we agreed with Polish Ministry of Digitalization that we prepare some declaration about cooperation in cybersecurity areas between V4 countries. I think that it is quite ideal, because cooperation in this area is very, very, very important, and we have some activities within EU. Maybe some of you know that European Union have from the 2016 some NIS directive. It is about security network and information in EU, and from this year have a special cybersecurity act. And this act is about new role or new mandate of the European agency ENISA, and European Union established new certification framework, because it is very important to have trusted equipment, and some not only equipment and hardware and software will be certified, but it is different from common criteria on the world level. We will certify IT services and processes, and it is on the member state of the EU established some network of the certification laboratories where will be the equipment certified. Some other activities within EU are from the beginning of the year, because it is necessary to have some common pre-assessment, and European Union asked all member states about risk 5G network in your countries, and now to the 1st of October, ENISA prepare the first draft of the European risk assessment for this area. I think that several years, from 2-3 years ago, start quite good steps within EU. What say on the start? of about our activities mentioned as a Polish colleague, and I think that now we are very close to the milestone where we have to say if it's for us a higher priority, free access to the internet and open networks, or security. Because it is my mind, it is not necessary have not regulated cyberspace, because in the cyberspace there are a lot of actors, including state actors, that are activities that it is against democratic part of the world, and we, maybe some of you know, last of the year issued warning against using of the some Chinese technologies, especially from the company Huawei and ZTE, and it was very, very interesting reaction for this warning from the politicians, from the operators, from the other state, and I think that the situation is now not very good, and we cannot certify equipment or network or information system only on the technical level. It is necessary to know that the equipment are developed and produced in different environments, different countries with different political system and with different aims. And our warning was based on the information from our partners, from the security community, from the, for example, legislation framework in the China, and some our partners support us very, very good, and some, including some member of the EU, was very diplomatic. In Prague conference we issue proposals, but not tools. We prepare second conference on the same area next year, and we would like if some new proposals, new recommendation will be issued on this conference next year. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And now, last but not least, Filip Plevač will give us. I hope you have the mic, right? You have the mic here. Yeah. Okay. Okay. All right. Okay. So Filip Plevač will give us the position of industry and how industry 4.0 is developed and digitalized. Filip, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much for being here. Have a nice afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Filip. In the last years I'm working on both areas, providing education and on the other side consultancy, advertising in the field of digital transformation, digitalization processes, these things which help the companies to be more in the future. And I was thinking how to see and how to describe what could be the need for a 5G net in the future. Try to imagine something like this, that you are having your own business, and in the past even some big factories are able to manage the business based on 10, 20 figures, and at the moment you can have something like 50,000 or millions. You would like to have them actual each seconds or milliseconds, your continuous processes running in these fields, and you need to apply plenty of the processes which are running in a quick time. This is exactly the future of these things, and this is the way how 5G can support the process which is called Industry 4.0 or simply digitalization. So even the companies having this kind of support can use more the new infrastructure based on the clouds, not only for storing but making calculations, analyzing. So you have your continuous process you would like to make, analyzing, collecting data, and everything in milliseconds, being able to update the things and apply a new management approach in the future. Everything's moving from the past. When you've got information, you try to do action for something what happened. The future is to do a prediction, and this is exactly where the tools like machine learning or artificial intelligence would like to play a role. And the first small applications are running in the business. So that's why I would say that 5G is not a big demand at the moment, but the companies as well in the Czech Republic are moving in the right direction in collecting data, having massive numbers compared to the past, and using them in the right direction. So I would say, speaking simply for the business, I see present there quite a good future and a good tool which is supporting these things, being able to continue in digital transformation. Simply, that's it. Thank you very much.
Okay, brief as usual. Thank you very much. Okay, so now we have a more than 1 hour of discussion, which is good, obviously. So I'll, being the good moderator, I still have to give floor to you, to our audience, obviously. If you want to ask the question, if you already have some question in your minds, feel free to raise your hand, and we will give you a mic, and you can have a question if anyone has something on his mind or not. No. So yeah, so it's now obviously up to me to start the discussion and to get it ongoing. I start with Chris, but because what you said, this was something that keeps me thinking about the industrial Internet of Things, which means like there will be hundreds of devices connected to the internet, probably via 5G networks. Do you really believe that all the things that are connected to the Internet of Things will need 5G, and will the operators of these things be willing to pay for 5G service? Because sometimes the things in Internet of Things, let's say all the connected stuff, they do not have the demands for the ultra low latency, perhaps 1 millisecond. If you have a parking sensor, for example, you don't need 1 millisecond latency. You only need 1 second, perhaps, and you don't need gigabit speeds. You need kilobit speeds. So, I didn't do any calculations per se, but I believe that maybe 95% of all the stuff that will be connected to the internet may not need the 5G capabilities. So how do you cope with that in your business, when you're thinking about the new business cases?
Sure. You'll have a lot of devices that are dependent upon just, they'll use Wi-Fi access, for example, or traditional network access that won't use 5G. So I like to call those kind of consumer-grade devices. So if you buy, a video camera inside your house, or if you buy a connected, like a Nest doorbell or something along those lines. Those types of things really won't need 5G. 5G will really be a play for things that are dependent upon mobile access, things where you're moving and that you need lower latency applications. But we think that there will be plenty of those types of things. So, for example, if you're doing like a healthcare monitoring solution. We have a pilot going on in the US right now with a hospital that's monitoring healthcare needs, where there's a need for very, very low latency response. And so same thing as we mentioned earlier with autonomous cars, or a variety of other applications that you can see develop there. So I think they're going to coexist. It'll depend on the application. A lot of the business case for 5G, quite frankly, will be driven by enterprise uses. So one of the conversations we've been having in the United States is around enterprise adoption of 5G. You'll see the build out where We'll build in a market, but we'll gradually fill out the market as the use cases emerge and as we see enterprises and other entities leveraging the 5G infrastructure. So it's less about a build it and they will come model, but more use case driven. So I think we'll see those different things emerge over time. It's slightly different than what we saw with the LTE 4G build, and I think a lot of that is because with the small cells, right, that we're using for millimeter wave spectrum, it requires incrementally more cell sites than what we saw with previous generations of wireless, and so the use cases have to sustain the infrastructure investment and all those new cell sites that have to be put in. AT&T, we are well positioned to do that in the United States because we're actually upgrading our network as we speak to support a first responder network called FirstNet. So we're actually doing two things at once. But I do think though the two types of services will continue to exist for quite some time.
So the LTE will be long-term employment, right?
Yeah, I mean 5G is not a hot swap, or overnight build. It's going to take years, realistically, and we'll have a presence. Our goal, as I mentioned earlier, is to have a nationwide 5G network by 2021, which means we'll have a presence in most of our major markets by next year, or 2021, assuming that I think it's already 2020. But how widespread it is in each one of those individual markets, and how many cells. Putting in cell sites is probably going to be the biggest challenge that we have with 5G, because in the U.S. We have to get permits from local municipalities to put in the sites, and that whole process takes time, so it's going to be a gradual build.
I see that the problems with network build-up are the same, wherever you go. It's pretty much the same here. That you have to talk to municipalities, you have to get all the necessary permits, and before you actually dig in, it takes a lot of time. So
that's right.
Yeah.
That's the same challenge we'll have, and if you look at the radius of an individual cell site. Today we use cellular, right? We use macro cells with 700 megahertz, 800 megahertz of spectrum. If you do a small cell with millimeter wave, you're probably talking 4 to 8 times the number of cell sites. So getting the permits for all those cell sites, getting the permissions, negotiating with the municipalities, that's a huge challenge. Now in the U.S., the Federal Communications Commission has stepped in and acknowledged that, and they've tried to deregulate that process to make it easier. They've tried to streamline it. It doesn't mean it's going to go away entirely, though.
Thank you. John Wright from the Financial Times. I wanted to clarify what Mr. Smith and Mr. Vrega said. Is it the case that you both believe that Hawaii should not be certified? Not because it's not good. It's a good piece of equipment, but because it could act as a spying device, essentially, for the Chinese government. There isn't enough transparency in its ownership to allow you to certify it. And did Mr. Boyer mean when he said that it could crowd out other competition? Are you saying that for that reason it shouldn't be certified? Also, the US government is putting pressure on the UK government not to certify Huawei because of their security issues.
We are looking for the other on the global market, the Huawei and the other Chinese company. This is approximately 40% of the global market, but there are also three companies at least, which are not Chinese. So having this situation, we decided basically at the moment not to buy equipment from Huawei. Maybe in the next year the situation will be some way clarified, and this matter will be some way solved. But so far, according to our experience, we have, as I said before, last year, a spy scandal where the Huawei, some Polish Huawei and Chinese Huawei workers in Poland was involved. I don't know about the end of this matter. So far we are decided not to use this kind of equipment. And of course, what is also important, we have information from our allies, all kind of information. I cannot tell you in details about this, but there is an enigma. Maybe in a few years it will be clarified, but now it's just status quo that we don't want to have Huawei products in Poland.
What means about certification? It is of course very difficult process because the equipment are very sophisticated, and if you certify some equipment, you certify it in the real configuration, in the real version of the firmware and hardware and so on. And if you make some new upgrade, all equipment now will be software upgraded. That means that the certification you have to again. That means that you have to have some regulation for upgraded. And the European system of the certification frame, I mentioned it, is different from the common criteria, and we will certify processes, including process of the developing, process of the deliver chain, and process of the installation and so on, and process for the operating of the system, companies that will be outsourcing the system. For all we will have some security schemes. In common criteria we call it protection profiles. In the European system we have security schemes, and all will be certified. That means that we cannot have new version immediately after issue it. Maybe the system will be relative I say it. It is similar like the banking system. The banking system are not upgraded each year, for example. And in this situation will be a situation probably very similar.
Do you want to follow up, or maybe I will follow up? So what you are saying is there's a common criteria, or how it's called, the testing that's now underway for the network products, common something, right? We have talked about it like half a year ago, I think, together. It's common, no.
Common criteria system around the world, and certificate from the common criteria is for all countries, but any countries have mandatory use product with the certificate. The common criteria operators around the world. In the European countries, it is in the Germany, France, Sweden, Netherlands and so on, but same like common criteria, European framework is not mandatory too, and it is on the commercial base. The companies have to pay for the certification, but it is important that companies that develop some new product will know what will be necessary have implemented to your products if they will be asked for the certification.
So what I wanted to ask was is the common criteria process which certifies the hardware itself together with software, do you consider it flawed for the future? Like, is it sufficient for the future developments? Maybe for 5G networks or for any future network products? Because as far as I understand what you said, was that with each new software update, there is new network vulnerability possible. It's possible to have a new network vulnerability in the network. So maybe it's the recertification process will have to be underway, and if the software update is if the software is updated very often, it would mean that perhaps the criteria will have to be filled, maybe 2 times a month or maybe 2 times a day, because, So is the process flawed? Do we need some new process for the certification, in your opinion?
Now it is developed, new equipment have developed with a new structure of the firmwares. The firmwares have some part that communicate between on the define protocols and so on. If will be new version issued, it will be necessary certify only one part of the, for example, firmwares. But of course, certification process is very, very long sometimes. For example, operating system from the Microsoft, it is several years. But I hope that in this product that will be used in the 5G networks, the situation will be better, because probably will be more than now more laboratories, and the laboratories will be probably, I hope, that in a lot of countries, and will be specialized for the special equipment, and we have to establish. The European Union issued this law, cyber security law, this April. And ENISA now established new regulation for this area. It is very new.
I was just going to add that when certification is only as good as the time the device is certified, to your point. So if you certify the device and then you update the device the next day, then you have to recertify the device. And so you can draw your own conclusions about whether or not that's an adequate way to protect equipment. But in the security world, there's been a lot of, certification is not an end-all be-all, I don't think, for security, because you have to continually be updating and certifying. So it creates its own set of challenges there. But I guess the point I wanted to make really is that even if you certify the devices for security, I still think there's a broader challenge, kind of going to my introductory remarks for the industry, around ensuring a competitive supply chain and making sure that all of the suppliers, even if they're all certified, for example, are competing on the merits, and that there's a level playing field, because there are additional concerns around certain entities that are pricing products, and at least in some people's view, and I won't quote anyone, but pricing them at significantly below market rates, and that are potentially being subsidized by other parties. And so I think those issues tilt the market in a particular way. And so from an operator's perspective, you could ask, like, why are we concerned about that? Our issue is we want to make sure we have a lot of options for our supply chain in the long run, that we're not locked in with only a few vendors. It's not, any business person would say more options are better than less, right? That's just common sense. You wouldn't want to be locked in with a particular supplier. You look at some of the data points that are out there. As a U.S. service provider, we are restricted from using Chinese suppliers for our network equipment in the United States by law. Under what's called the NDAA, the National Defense Authorization Act, it prohibits anyone who offers services to the U.S. government from using that equipment. So, as a major supplier to both the U.S. government around the world and other nations around the world, we have a restriction there. And so the concern becomes a very practical matter. We could find ourselves in a situation, 3 to 4 years from now, where we have a limited number of suppliers that remain, basically Nokia and Ericsson, and potentially Samsung, who's now entering the space. where does that leave us in the long run? And then if you look at the data, the amount of money that Nokia and Ericsson spend on things like research and development for new technology is dwarfed by the amount of money that the Chinese companies spend. So where does that leave us in the long run? And to me, that's the challenge that we're struggling with, is not only how do we secure the equipment by getting it certified and making sure that it doesn't have a security flaw, but even if the equipment is certified, you have this long-term issue around a sustainable, competitive supply chain, and then it raises the questions around what are the appropriate government policies that can help ensure a competitive supply chain. And that's when, as I mentioned earlier, that's where we think things like interoperability requirements, so that you're not locked into a particular vendor, things like vendor diversity, where you ensure that you use multiple vendors so that each has a piece of the pie, things like transparency around the deal structure, so that someone is not artificially lowering their prices. Those are all things that we think are critical subcomponents of leveling the playing field, so that all providers compete on the merits. We're not, as an operator, I'm not saying that China shouldn't have a play in that. They certainly should. It's just a question of how do we create the right policy framework to balance out all the equities so that it's a real competition and not something that's artificial.
I think maybe follow up a little bit on that, because now I'll play a role of devil's advocate a little bit. Are you afraid of falling behind technologically if you are not using Chinese products in your network? Because you mentioned that the European companies are investing far less into R&D, and that, when I talk to the operators, they say quite often that they're not buying Chinese products like the Huawei and mainly Huawei, not ZTE, but mainly Huawei hardware, not because it's cheaper or it's they have a better customer care perhaps, but because it's technologically much more advanced. So do you think that in the long run you may be falling behind by not using Chinese products?
I mean, it's an interesting question. I mean, right now we feel fairly confident with the vendors that we have, which is Nokia, Ericsson, and Samsung. But you do raise a good point that with the R&D direction that they're heading in, where are we going to be in 3 years, 5 years, 7 years down the road? It's not healthy for the industry to have a limited set of options there. We want to have a lot of suppliers competing with each other to be innovative and create new capabilities, and I think that that's the desirable thing from the business perspective. And so we'd create an environment where you would take what traditionally when we buy equipment, we buy cell sites, right? We buy what's called the technical term is an E-node B, but it's basically a device. It's a cell site. It's got an antenna, a radio unit. It's got a piece of some hardware and some software, to keep it really simple, integrated into this device. And what we're trying to do with things like the O-RAN Alliance is basically unbundle that equipment so that you could decouple the software from the hardware, or you could have an environment where the software could be written by one company, the hardware could be provided by another company, the radio unit could be provided by another company. And we think what that does is by kind of disaggregating the network, you lower the barriers to entry for new parties in the supply chain, because you no longer have to build a fully integrated device. You can just build a subcomponent of the device. So an example of this is there's a company in Massachusetts called Altiostar that's partnering with Rakuten in Japan to build a wireless 5G network, and they only provide 5G software. They don't do anything with the physical equipment side. So there are things happening in the industry that will, we think in the long run, lead to more options in the supply chain. But the concern is that it'll lead to more innovation. But if carriers sign up with particular vendors that are not supporting these standards and are not interoperable, they'll effectively lock out that type of competition for the next 5 to 10 years, and those companies will just go away because these new startups that are in the space won't have the business opportunity that they would otherwise have. So that's why this issue of how do we create interoperability standards is critically important, I think, at least from my perspective in the short run. I know it's a little bit confusing, but that's kind of the thing that we've been talking with the U.S. government about, and we've been talking a lot with other governments around the world about, is how do we create a policy framework that allows these new parties to thrive and ensure that we have a competitive supply chain in the long run.
Thank you, Marsha. Incumbent supporting competition is very new. But, okay. Well, okay. Any more? Here, it's the gentleman in.
My name is Olle Schmidt. I'm actually involved in ELF, European Liberal Forum. Of course, this security and spy matters is vitally important. I should say that I'm from Sweden, so Ericsson, well, I have shares there as well, so I'm a bit biased. But don't you think that the most essential thing is that about reciprocity, rule of law, and competition? I think sometimes I'm a free trader, absolutely. I'm a liberal. But I think sometimes we are a bit naive in Europe. Because the Chinese are going to run out, no, perhaps not only that, going to run over us all. One of our crown jewels in my country, Volvo, that was a real jewelry in my country, is now owned by the Chinese. We can't do anything about it. Perhaps that's good, as Mr. Boyer said, perhaps that's good. But I think we ought to take care of our own interests in a decent way, And the Chinese, if I may be insulting them, I don't think they act in a fair way. Level playing field, competition, that's all right. I think that's, for me, that's a real vital issue. Thanks.
You said that there's not a big demand right now for 5G services from the industry point of view. What do you think is needed to, to increase the demand? What do you think the operators need to sell to the companies, to the manufacturers, and what do you think the manufacturers should want from the operators to get it all going on?
Thanks. I would say that demand's not yet, because the companies are not using this big number of data transition yet. So they're aiming there, and the need will come. This is for definite. How quickly this will appear, hard to say. If you speak about operators, and I can see in the last years that many IT companies would like to penetrate the industry, provide some industrial solutions, but they're generally coming from the field of finance or the public sector, etc. And the business itself, it behaves differently what they're expecting. And I think the operators are in the similar area and similar situation there, because business is interested in making money, and these things are the tools that help you to be more competitive, being able to successful in the future. It was a good point about the free market. So you having the free competition, you would like to succeed based on your competencies, knowledge, tradition, and your innovation. So it means these things can help you. And if I going back, really many things in healthy marketing, other stuff is that you trying to use big data calculation, being able to predict the future, and let's say adjust your decisions or thinking or strategy planning based on you should be a little bit more successful, being able to expect what will happen in the future based on some math trends, other things. This is the future, what you can do there. Just for imagination, at the moment I have the project, I'm helping the company to manage their processes in big one, billions in Czech crowns turnover, to manage the processes based on the math rules. Based on these predictions, being able to send the commands on the process and moderate it, but everything based on the figures. So it means make it fully automated. In process of management, not like functionality like a robot, somebody can imagine, but something in the real process. So it means if these things will come in the big numbers, it's like everything. Before the mobiles, what was the need for mobiles? So it means these new nets will bring new possibilities. This is for definite. I can see that. Andre is okay.
We have one more question. No, not anymore. Any more questions here? Okay. Well, maybe you want to add something?
Maybe for your information, this year Huawei signed 28 agreements with European operators. Yes, it is a big number.
Okay. Okay, maybe I'll still play my favorite role of devil's advocate with what Mr. Schmidt said about the Chinese, that they are not fair. It's one point that I like to make is the the technological advancement of the Chinese companies. Maybe is it the perception that the Chinese companies are not fair? Isn't it because they are much more technologically advanced than they used to be? Because that's we as pretty much everyone here is Westerner. And we were, for the last like 300 years, we were used to being technologically much more advanced than the rest of the world. And now for the last like 5 to 10 years, we might not be anymore. So I'd like to ask maybe the panel about what they think about it, about the advancement of the Chinese and about the technological threats that it might pose. Maybe Mr. Ranke.
Well, I think speaking about Chinese companies not being fair because they were not so advanced in technology. It used to be that they were quite behind the whole world, but remember on the other hand that many years ago the porcelain or the gunpowder was invented in China. I believe that there is no kind of racism or something like this in this position against Chinese company. We don't have any problems with Taiwanese film. I believe that of course we have a lot information about the United States, but very small number information what's going on in China, except of course Hong Kong, which is on the TV screens for 3 months. And this is kind of precaution, like for instance, we don't have anything against American aircraft like Boeing, but you see at the moment, because we don't know what's going on with the test with this American aircraft, a lot of them are grounded and not flying simply. And this is to the some extent a similar situation with China. The Western world, the Euro-Atlantic world, is supposed to have some guarantees concerning the products, very sophisticated products of Chinese companies. And this is not racism, this is just precautions. We have to make secure our world, and this is the only reason for our steps, let's say, against Chinese films. If we will get guarantees, the situation will be quite different. Thank you.
Maybe Chris, do you feel that AT&T is disadvantaged because the US now has no relevant telco vendor in place? It's all either Europeans or Chinese or Koreans.
Yeah, I mean, look, I don't know that we're disadvantaged by that today. I mean, I think, like I said earlier, I think we're pretty confident that we're going to build a world-class 5G network with the vendors that we have, which is Nokia, Ericsson, and Samsung. We are supporting initiatives like what I mentioned, the disaggregation of the RAN, the whole O-RAN initiative, which we think will bring in newer competitors, or at the very least what it will do is by making everything interoperable, it will allow us to build a network with best-of-breed solutions where we can, for example, pick a radio unit from Samsung. This is a hypothetical radio unit from Samsung and a baseband hardware from Ericsson or someone. We've been actually testing those types of scenarios, so it would allow us to choose best-of-breed components. So no, I don't know that. Look, the Chinese equipment is definitely getting better and better. There's no doubt about that. I'm not going to criticize them on the quality of the equipment. Everything I've heard is that they build quality equipment today. In terms of performance. You can look at the UK report that came out from GCHQ. They talked a lot about some of the issues with the equipment, so I'm not going to repeat what they put in their report, but they have a lot of, they go through a litany of discussions around issues that they've encountered, but the bottom line for us is that we're pretty confident with the vendors that we have, but we do want to see, our concern is more what happens in 3 to 5 years if the trend that we're on, continues down the path that it's on. I'll give you another data point. In 2010, I think the Chinese suppliers had something around 8 to 9% market share globally of the telecommunications equipment market. I think today it's upwards of 39%. They recently, Huawei just recently passed Ericsson as the largest provider of network equipment in the world. Barely, I think it's like 30-something% to like 29, but they still are now the leading provider, and it's been widely, I'll have to pull up some sources, but there's widely talked about. And so if you look at those data points, it's really not, or we're pretty confident we can build a very robust 5G network with what we have. The issue is more what happens in 5 years. The trajectory that we're on is not a great trajectory. And you go back to the R&D data points that I mentioned earlier, we want to make sure that we don't continue down this path and ignore the issue and then end up in a situation where in 3 to 5 years we just don't have the same number of options in the supply chain. That's really the thing we're concerned about. And I'm not saying that those supply chain options have to be from the United States or have to be from Europe necessarily. It just means that as a business, it's in our best interest to have a wide variety of vendors that are competing with each other on the merits. That's what drives innovation in technology. People innovate when they feel like they have to compete. And so I think, as you say, it's a slightly different argument for an incumbent to be making, but that is the model that we'd like to see play out from a supply chain perspective. And we think the policy community needs to put in place those policies today to effectuate an outcome that we may not actually see for several years. But if we don't put in place those policies now, we're just kicking the can down the road, and we're going to end up in the exact same situation we are now in 3 years, but only worse.
Maybe to follow up, I would like to get back perhaps a little bit to the warning that you issued in December last year. It was, what do you expect now the operators to do actually? You said that you got some interesting reactions from the politicians and from operators. In January I wrote an article for Budování, for one of the Czech dailies about Huawei and about how networks are developed and deployed, and I couldn't kind of get almost any of the operators to be on record for that, like to talk about Huawei and their network. I still have some friends there, so I finally got what I needed, but they were quite silent about that. So I would say that I would like to know about the reactions that you got from the telcos, perhaps to the warning. How did they react, and what do you expect from them to do right now?
I think that our operators are quite good with our warning. We was a little surprised because if we explain them that the problem is, for example, I mentioned it in the legal framework, because in China's legal framework is in the two law written that Chinese companies have to cooperate with China government and intelligence services. And if this service will be asked for example, implemented some backdoors or back to the products, they have to wait. It is problem. And if we explain this to our Czech operators, they, I think, have good approach because, of course, some of them have now a lot of Chinese equipment in the 4G networks, but they use equipment from different producers, not only for the Huawei, for example. They're using Ericsson, some Nokia, and it is divided. And I think that it is one of the way to the future. Is it diverse this risk to the different equipments?
So is it what's sufficient for you now? That they will tell you that they are federating the network, so they are using the other vendors' equipment to check on the Chinese?
Yes, we asked them, and all companies have to inform us about the using of the equipments, of course, only in the critical information infrastructure, because we can regulate it only the information system that is under our law. That means critical information infrastructure, important system, and information system of the essential services providers. And we have criteria what information systems are involved to this group. And in these systems are, of course, some communication system for example, mobile phones and data transmission in Czech Republic. And we now have information about using equipment, and we have some recommendation for new tenders for new equipment, and only one ministries, I think, can buy the equipment. This week we have discussion with Security Board of the government, and to the, I think, middle of October will be put to the government information about the situation.
Which will probably not be public, right? Okay, that's how it goes, unfortunately, with the security. Okay, please, gentleman here.
My name is Václav Skala, and I'm from the university, so I'm from the opposite side. Actually, I would say that the security of those systems can be split to two things. One is data, and the second one is the system that should work according to a specification. I will be very unfair, but I think that all systems nowadays do have backdoor. All, from all the countries, from all the producers. I'm not going to specify the vendors, but it is known that even very cryptic messages were encrypted, and there are some Israeli companies that can practically get information even from very, very sophisticated systems. So I think that that is somehow, it should be somehow considered that in today's situation we are unable to make something like online certification, like your antivirus, because antivirus is changing every second day in my computer. So I cannot go to such a, let me say, million of devices, sending them updates and certifying all of them. So that should be considered, I think, in the preparation of those things, because malfunctioning of the system, that means keeping in operating system in the operating state actually, and the second one are data, and data should be somehow crypted by persons, by company itself. They should take care about the data. By the way, I don't know if it is known, but the Chinese are experimentally have a connection between Beijing and Shanghai based on quantum computing. So it's pretty secure communication. Thank you very much.
Yeah, this is because it's true. It's one of the operators actually they told me that it's a problem of wanting too many features for too short amount of time with and too low the price. When there's a network equipment going into space, you have very different demands on that. Going into air, actually, if you are not Boeing, obviously. So you have some demands for that, but if it's a network equipment for the basic consumer or for the network, then the money issue is quite big, and less money for the programmers, the less security is, right? Maybe regarding security, I'm still I want to use Philip for that. How much interested are your clients that you advise, perhaps, about digitalization of their processes? How interested are they in network security? Are they in any way interested in that, in security of their data? Because that's one of the parts of the digitalization process in industry. That you increase your security risks. So how much interest is there in the among the CEOs that you advise?
Thanks. I will start with this, that this topic inside the companies is far, far, far away from what you discussed now. Because if you speak about the cybersecurity from company perspective, it's more about the sensitivity for data. If you do some companies, you can split, let's say, sensitive data, keep them in, and the other stuff, what you can do, for example, clouds and other stuff. So these are discussions like this. And being very basic, I would say that companies becoming sensitive when they are hacked. And sometimes what's biggest fun is that even the subjects like companies you can split in two groups. First is which was hacked, and second which was hacked and still not aware about it. So this is the life there, so I think this is really far from discussion what you open now in more general stuff there. So the topic becoming more and more important, and even Czech Republic are companies with billions turnovers who were, for example, stopped 1 or 2 weeks from production or from business perspective, losing sensitive information about their clients, because this is other stuff which is different to the retail. If there be like a person, somebody is stealing our data and try to sell them somewhere and make a business, I would say we don't care, general. But if you would like to use data from companies, this is totally different topic. I mean, especially about your clients, your price policy, your development, innovation programs, etc. These are things which are enormously sensitive. So I'm feeling it's a little bit different world, to be honest. Continuing from discussion which was before. Okay.
So just to offer a couple thoughts on the issue of companies and kind of security. At least from my experience, recently there's a growing acknowledgement, at least in the U.S., and I think this applies globally because a lot of the companies I deal with are global, around the concerns towards security, especially as we move towards an IoT environment. There's growing acknowledgement that there has to be security requirements built into all these devices that are going to be connected to networks because of the issues that you raised around just general security. So an example of that is that earlier this week, I guess yesterday, Tuesday, an organization called the Council for Securing the Digital Economy, which is a US-based group. It's a collection of standards bodies, includes groups like ADIS, which is the Alliance for Telecommunications Industry Standards, the Consumer Technology Association, several bodies put out a report talking about a baseline of security requirements for IoT devices. So these are basic things. They're not rocket science, but they're things like, don't use default passwords, make sure that you have the ability to update the devices, that you have regular patching cycles. So basic common sense advice for developers and device manufacturers around securing those devices. And I know that here in the EU, ANISA is in the process of looking at that as well under the European cybersecurity law. So I do think there's at least a growing acknowledgement on the industry side, and from people I deal with anyway, that this is an issue that needs to be dealt with. We had the experience with Mirai botnet a couple of years ago that continues to go on today. So I think industry writ large is aware of the issue and trying to deal with it as best we can. On the issue of backdoors, to be clear, I think all networking equipment and all software has vulnerabilities. That's an inevitable thing. Like that's why we maintain, you know, at least in the US, we have this thing called the National Vulnerability Database that is maintained by MITRE, which is an organization that supports NIST, the National Institute of Standards and Technology. We're constantly publishing new vulnerability updates. I know the EU countries all participate in that process as well. So that's kind of something that goes on. I think the one unique thing we have here is, you know, the extent to which the vulnerabilities are, you know, what the motivation for the vulnerability is. Is it just a mistake, somebody wrote bad code, or is it because someone intentionally injected a vulnerability? You don't know that, but I think that's there's a slight difference between, you know, poor coding practices that lead to vulnerabilities versus them being intentionally injected into software. So I don't know to what extent either occurs, but there's certainly going to be vulnerabilities in the equipment.
That's a very good point. Maybe I'd like to extend one thing, because one part of cybersecurity is infrastructure, your programs, your safety stuff. But if you see statistics how the company are hacked, it's most about the internal employees making some stupidities or the other facts. And this is something what IT industry can't affect, and it's about the company culture, learning new things and developing all the companies like entities. So for example, I was doing 2 years ago a workshop in Germany showing to Czech business people on 2 companies, and one was pretty new, close to Munich. There was a new director who was completely involved in building up a new plant, and we had some chat, and he was look at the servers. This is at the moment like a Ford, completely safe, etc. And we were having some funds, like he see the cybersecurity in Germany, and he was saying something like this: look, what do you like to solve here? Last week the Bundestag was hacked. So you think you are better prepared, or what's your position? So it means companies working with strategies like to being hacked is something like the reality for the future. And they need to have some backup plans for the information, etc. But this is not about the IT, it is about the strategy and the other plans. Thanks.
Yeah, one thing about the company security and the you know, government security, perhaps, because you also had Philip said that, you know, that the companies are usually aware of the need for more security when they are hacked. So maybe the government office is also aware of the need for this, for, you know, maintaining security standards after they hack. Maybe you can share perhaps also of the experience of our Ministry of Foreign Affairs.
Yes, our ministries are under attacks, but not so big problem for the ministries, because there are divided information system that is connected to the public network and internal information system. In the media was information about attack against our Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Of course, this is, I think, one of the best target for the attackers, because MFA have very interesting data from the international organization and so on. And this attack was applied like usually. It was attacked in some documents that was sent by email, and the users click to this documents, and the problem was in the world. But it is unpleasant, of course, but it is not so big problem, because my point of view, because we are responsible for the protection of the classified information. It is not so big problem if some public information are published or sent to the people that cannot write for the information. But in the all information system, including communications like 5G, is necessary integrity of data, availability, confidentiality. And we see that problem with Chinese companies and Chinese technology is in the availability, because it is necessary protect this information between this information system against switch off this information system or this equipment, and integrity is a problem for attackers, and availability or confidentiality, weekend data encrypted and so on. It is exit way like protect information and confidentiality data in this communication system and in this system and the government bodies. I think that we have a lot of information about attacks. We inform our ministry or operators of our system about attacks, about indication of compromission of the system, and we have quite good system for early warning, and I think that our companies that operate this information system within critical infrastructure and ministries, I think that now it is quite good situation in Czech Republic.
Thank you. Any questions? No. Maybe I'd like to move a little bit towards the much more commercial issues than the cybersecurity issues. You talked in the beginning, Chris, about the frequencies that you have in AT&T, both the coverage sub-gigahertz and this millimeter wave. But you know, 5G, it's the promises of low latency and high bandwidth are only achievable by the high gigahertz frequencies, right? And they have this problem that you also mentioned about the penetration, especially indoor penetration. So I would like to you know, to see how do you plan to cope with that, because there's a you know, I saw an analysis of AT&T network in Minneapolis, I think, or was it Denver or Minneapolis? I don't know, can't remember. But it was the test ended when the person that was testing it with the phone entered the building and closed the door because there was no signal inside, which is obviously something that we are not very, you know, we do not really want this, to lose the signal. We're not very much used to it with the technologies that we have now. So, you know, how do you cope with that?
Yeah, so the spectrum works in concert with each other, right? So millimeter wave spectrum, which is the high bandwidth spectrum, you're talking somewhere upwards over 6 megahertz, generally speaking. That type of spectrum is sight limited, so it's line of sight. So if you're not in a line of sight, if I was sitting here and I was trying to communicate with the cell site in the back of the room, it would work fine. If I walked through that door over there and went out of the room, it would no longer work, because it doesn't go through, it doesn't propagate through obstacles, right, like traditional cellular spectrum. So millimeter wave requires a lot of cell sites in order to ensure line of sight visibility to get that high bandwidth. Outdoors, that's doable. You know, it's going to require a lot of sites. That's what the small cells are for, really, is to fill that in. But you also use like the sub-6 and mid-band spectrum, which provides higher bandwidth, faster speeds, but it also has better propagation. It can actually work through obstacles, so it's not as limited as millimeter wave. And then you have traditional cellular, the 700, 800 megahertz spectrum that we've always used for things like LTE and 4G, that will be upgraded to 5G. So, so yes, you do need, there are limitations with millimeter wave, but we feel like those can be overcome as we deploy. All the different types of spectrum, low, mid, and high band, work in concert with one another. It's not like a user is going to walk in a building and lose connectivity entirely. They will just work on a different spectrum band than the millimeter wave spectrum, so they'll get a slightly different performance than they would if they were in range of a site. So, but that will all sort itself out over time as we do the deployment, in my view. So. The idea is obviously to give the customer as transparent a user experience as possible, so they don't need to be thinking about these types of things. But I think for most users, it's going to work fairly well once we get it deployed. But again, the challenge we have is with millimeter wave, it's going to require a lot of small cell sites, and it goes back to all the permitting in municipalities and placing the sites and the build-out issues, which are going to take time.
And do you think that deployment of such a number of small sites is going to be revenue positive? Because it's, there's a huge amount of money being poured into the network in that way. This is something that always strikes me as very odd, that everyone's talking about 5G, about the possibilities that it presents, but since there is no current real business case apart of fixed wireless, it's hard to justify the investment, right?
Well, I think the market dynamics are different in the U.S. than they are in Europe, number one. But I think in the U.S. the small cell build-outs are going to largely be driven by use cases, and they'll be driven by enterprise and government adoption of the technology. So it'll depend. So I think the economics. I'm not an economics guy. I'm not a finance guy. So all I know is that we are fully committed to doing the 5G deployment in the U.S. I think that we do have the unique situation there that we have 4 major mobile operators across the United States today. Sprint and T-Mobile merge, we'll have 3. It allows the companies to gain scale because they serve the entire footprint of the country, which is 300 million plus users, which changes some of the economics around it. My understanding of the European market is that the network operators here are constantly challenged because they don't have the same scale benefits that we do in terms of equipment, because they operate in a more regionalized basis as opposed to, like, I don't want to get into the European market dynamics, it's not my area of expertise, but you don't have, as far as I know, a mobile operator that operates across the entirety of all 28 countries that are members of the European Union, right? Whereas in the United States, we do. And so, in my opinion, telecommunications is an infrastructure business. Any infrastructure-intensive business is highly dependent upon scale. The bigger the scale, the more you can spread cost across a wider user base. And economically, that creates a different incentive structure for those businesses as it would be if you were doing it individually, country by country, where the user base is smaller. So I think there's some economics that come into play with scale that benefit us, that will help us, have traditionally helped us roll things out, and then of course the regulatory environment is a little different as well.
Okay, any questions?
I have a question to Mr. Breyer concerning the 5G network, because you mentioned that you own also HBO, and so AT&T can be considered as a content provider and content producer, and as we know, 5G allows also to carry some video signals or television over this network. So do you have any plans to offer some TV over 5G in the future in order to kill ATSC 3.0 standards in the long term?
The entire premise for our merger with Warner Media, our Time Warner, was to create synergies between content and content distribution. So certainly the 5G network is a content distribution network at some level. The increased bandwidth will enable us to offer, in theory, high-grade content over the 5G network. Whether what specific plans we have there haven't been announced, so I can't say, but that's obviously one of the rationales behind doing the merger.
What do you think is a killer app for 5G? Because for 3G it was internet, for 4G it's HD video, so what's the killer app for 5G?
I don't know. We'll find out, right?
That's a good thing to tell your CFO.
Well, I'm not the CFO.
I have no idea what this is going to be used for. Give me money.
Recently opened some 5G labs in the US. 5G labs.
Yes, we do. We have labs in Austin.
So you created an environment for the new companies to develop some 5G applications and so on. So
that's right.
Could you share some experience?
I personally don't know the answer to that. I know we've opened the labs up. What we've actually done there is, I haven't been briefed on that, so I can't say. I know we're working through a wide variety, but we were just talking last week with doing a 5G security test bed with the National Cybersecurity Center of Excellence in Maryland about doing something there. So there's a lot of test beds and different things going on. I think that's actually something that would be a really interesting thing, because the more we can get people testing the technology, thinking about how to use the technology, that will ultimately create the use cases down the road.
Okay, so our time is almost up, so I'll offer the chance for the last question perhaps, and if there is no question, maybe, yeah.
We were speaking about the certification procedures and so on, but from my point of view it's very important to monitor data flow. And as I know, operators are monitoring data traffic or data in the internet and in other environments. And my question is, what's your opinion about this monitoring and data analytics, including some artificial elements in the future concerning the security? So that means one thing is the certification of the equipment is not enough, because we know very well that if I write a code and if I put some backdoors there, and if I don't tell you anything about it, so it's hard to find out even in the certification procedures that I wrote the backdoors in the code. So what is your opinion about the monitoring of the data flow? Thank you.
Thank you. I think you probably talk about a new law about our military intelligence service. It is a big challenge for our politicians, but in other countries exists monitoring of the internet, and I talk about it. I think that we have to make some decision. What is higher priority for us? Security or freedom of the access and to the internet and public networks. I'm from intelligence services. I work a lot of years for intelligence services, and I'm from the security area. I think that it is necessary for the future. But of course, we have to establish a lot of control systems and so on and so on. But intelligence services are under control of the internal regulation, under politician, under government. I think that citizens have to trust to the intelligence services in Czech Republic.
Mr. Renga.
Ladies and gentlemen, going to the end, I would like to make some remark concerning the 5G matters. Of course, just like one of gentlemen told us a few minutes ago, as far as classified documents or classified information are concerned, of course, sooner or later we can compare to this unclassified. We can make them unclassified, but the subject of 5G of this kind, that we have take under consideration what is the speed of this process. That is one thing, and the other, what is an amount of this data being unclassified. And speed and huge amount of data being unclassified, there is some kind of very bad situation for states and also for societies. And as was said before, we are in a world where the number of actors, both state and unstate actors, is growing very fast per year. Before, maybe 30 years ago or so, during the Cold War, so-called Cold War, the world was much simpler. now is going to be much more complicated, and there is a reason to think about security in this subject. I would like to tell you that Polish cyber experts, they are very much monitoring the whole situation in the world, and they are what is the most essential in cooperation not only with the Czech services but also with all NATO services concerning this kind of events which can be very bad for the whole world. Okay, that's it. Thank you very much for invitation.
Okay, thank you very much, and our time is up, so thanks to all our panelists for being here with us for the last 2 hours and sharing their valuable thoughts. So I thank Filip Levač, Jaroslav Schmid, Chris Boyer, and Antony Brega. Thank you very much, and enjoy the evening, and thank you all for participating. I hope that I saw that Sharka distributed the paper that you wrote, so I hope you find it enjoyable. I tried to make it as funny as possible for the topic. So let's see if you are interested. So thank you very much, and enjoy your evening. And again, so let's see each other again at some of the next things that we do here at the Institute. Thank you.